Welcome to the first episode of Hustle to Harmony. This is going to be a very exciting journey. I'm really excited about our first guest, who ironically enough has been the first guest on the last two podcasts that I've started. I feel different about this one because this is the one that I am soul aligned with, and you'll learn more about that in the episode. But let me read you the intro to my good friend Allison. Welcome back to Hustle to Harmony. Today we've got an incredible special guest with us, someone who's truly redefining what it means to create success without the burnout. I'm thrilled to welcome Allison Crow to the show. Allison is a powerhouse in the coaching world with over 17 years of experience helping high achievers and business owners break free from hustle culture and embrace what she calls soul-aligned success. She's the creator of the self-leadership approach and runs a wildly successful practice where she coaches people not just in their businesses, but on their emotional alignment and personal freedom. What makes Allison so unique is her blend of no-nonsense business strategy with a healthy dose of spirituality and emotional awareness. She's all about helping people move from performing and proving to living fully in their truth. Her work is for anyone who wants to achieve incredible success without losing themselves in the process. So buckle up, because today we're diving deep into what it really means to lead with compassion, trust your inner guidance, and build a business that doesn't just look good, but feels good. And on a personal note, Allison has been a North Star in me building my coaching practice. She was one of the first people that I met that was willing to help me build my business. She's been a friend, a confidant, and someone that I really look up to throughout the years. So I'm really excited to share this episode with you. And without further ado, here's Allison Crow.
Sometimes good enough is good enough.
Well, I think a lot more times good enough is good enough, because some of us are like our 7, 8, 9 is most people's 3, like the over performative. And it's not about delivering less to the audience, but I've really taken, I didn't believe this, but a couple years ago, a therapist and then my psychiatrist both within a year mentioned, you're really hard on yourself. And I was like, what are you talking about, Willis?
What are you talking about,
Willis?
Willis?
But I pay them for feedback. So I listened and I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
That I call it quiet striving.
Yeah. That's quiet striving. That's interesting. I noticed,
right.
I turned 51 tomorrow.
Well, happy birthday.
Well, thank you. But with that, when I turned 50, it came with this flood of emotions of like, what the heck have I been doing? What are we even doing now? And now I'm turning 51. And I'm like, yeah, I don't give a shit. I don't care.
I asked my therapist, or not my therapist, my psychiatrist. I think sometimes when I go for my ADD med management, because it's a little bit longer appointment, I end up in a little bit of therapy. And he was like, oh, this is a normal psychology thing from old school psychology. And I felt a lot of relief. And because I told him recently, I haven't, in the past, I liked having a goal. I liked having something to go after. And you mentioned before we were recording, like the just being. And I told him, I said, I don't really know what I want to go after, what I want to, that part of me doesn't feel driven. And he said, and I said, I feel a little bummed about it. And he's like, that is very typical midlife, like, and let me get my words straight. Impossible ideals, which is something that I noticed the last 5 years of my clients who would come to the calls and they were holding themselves to these, whether it was parenting, work, these really high standards. This is the quiet striving, right? That you don't, because society says this is what you're supposed to do. And then you kind of loosen up and realize that's an impossible standard. And there's a little bit of melancholy or depression that comes with it. And he did say on the other side is this more, he didn't use the word being, but this more acceptance and the joy comes back. And so I feel like I'm in the middle of that slow pendulum swing of, in the same way we were acclimating our tech and just kind of checking. And, it's like, we could worry about the time, or we could just deal with the moment that's here, or meet the moment. And so meeting the moment of, not having shame when, I don't wake up and know I'm going after some goal, and just being a little bit more, allowing a little bit more of the melancholy. I have an affection for that word because of my husband and his writing when he was a teacher, but that the melancholy isn't such a bad thing. It's in a realignment. And then you start shedding the things that don't matter, and you just enjoy the things that do, with uh, more chop wood, carry water. And
Yeah.
I guess to some people that's going to sound really depressing or miserable, but to me it's like, oh no, this is just meeting the moment and being here and doing the things I want to do and doing the things I need to do for my business. And
Yeah.
I notice I'm self-conscious about sounding so depressed.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think you and I are we always track in similar spots in life, every time we talk. And, I think that's why I wanted in this latest incarnation of the crazy things that I do. I was like, well, if I'm going to do another first one, I got to have you on as the first person, But I do think that's because anytime we connect, we're always tracking through similar phases. And I think, as you were talking, I was thinking like, what do I do when I go on vacation? I'm not really striving to be the perfect me or to get all the money or to get all the thing. Like, I just kind of want to sit there and be and absorb the sensations of wherever I am and experience and be present, and I was like, well, that's interesting that the rest of my life is in this tornado of more or better or different. And and then you get to an age where, I think I'm at now, is where just enjoy
I just
that.
turned 53.
Yeah.
And for me, and probably for you too, the money is still a thing, right? Like,
yeah.
I often do say that, if I had all this wealth, I don't want to say all the problems were solved, but a big portion is I still have to work. And I will have to work for a while. And I'm coming out of an unraveling of my identity being fulfilled with work and stepping back in. I didn't know that that was happening. I didn't know that I was building a business on what's called recognition response euphoria, which is the opposite of rejection, at the opposite end of the spectrum of rejection sensitive dysphoria, which are both traits of people with ADHD. And at 50, I was diagnosed with ADHD, and at 51, I was diagnosed with autism. And so the paradigm and the things I've struggled with and what's normal and what I'm it's this whole crock pot I've been slowly kind of unlearning and untying with my little engineer. Like, it's like taking apart a radio and figuring out how it works. And then now I'm in the place of, how do I want to put it back? But it's like an alcoholic walking into a bar. And recently I've shifted to, what would it look like if I continue to work in this business? And I do need to rebuild. I had the last 2 years were not enough financially for me, which was a part of the releasing. It's real easy to say you can, let me reduce the identity with business while you're still making a couple of $100,000 a year. Like, part of that is the income. And it's time to rebuild and more conscious than ever. And it sounds like you too. It's like, no, really, what do I want to create? How do I want to be with myself? What is my physical capacity? Because I've also had a lot of physical limitations. And just last week, I decided to stop praying for vitality and accept the energy I have.
Wow.
Because it felt right. Like, love what I have. And if I have limited physical vitality and limited capacity, I have some lung issues going on, and I have had for 4 years. It's like, okay, quit holding myself to a past standard of me. And it doesn't mean I've failed. None of us None of us are 33 anymore.
Right?
Do
Right?
you do that? Do you see, I mean, I
Yeah.
know you're like, you and I are constantly evolving and creating and moving towards what feels good. And, I know you're raising a family and you've lost your mom, and real life hits us all.
Yeah.
And it's like all the little pieces inside the radio shift. And so it's not a static thing. It's not like, oh, let me get this business built and then we run it. I always say we're gardeners, not machines. And the climate changes, just like the climate does. In Texas this year, they're saying we're going to have puny bluebonnets because we didn't have enough rain.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, but it just is, right?
It
Like
just
that.
is. Yeah.
But that's the same with us. Is so.
Yeah.
There was something you were saying earlier, and I now have 3 things. Like, if your leaders aren't doing these 3 things and at least mentioning them, that's a red flag for me. And one of them is identifying, like, if they don't just at least acknowledge systems of oppression, they don't have to teach it, but that there are factors outside of us, right?
Sure.
Because I do think in the personal growth world, toxic individualism is actually physically harming us. We need each other. And there are all kinds of systems that are invisible, causing problems, and we're holding ourselves to this standard. The second one is nervous system and nervous system regulation. Again, they don't have to teach it, but it's really difficult to be in your creative flow when your nervous system is in fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
And the third one, what is the third one? I can't remember right now. These are all really important, but those 2 are biggies. Oh, self-trust, right? Like if your leaders aren't pushing, the one thing I talk about, if your leaders aren't putting it back to you to say, and how does that feel inside of you? What's your version of it? If they're not getting you to trust yourself, right? Because I think so much of these systems of oppression teach us to source outside. And then we end up building a reliance on the weather, so to speak, right? Like to follow the metaphor, right?
Yeah.
And then we're mad because our bluebonnets aren't as beautiful as they were the year before, but we couldn't control the rain. So
True.
yeah.
True. Yeah. I think one of the words that I hear you saying that kind of jogs my thought process is identity. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
We think that once we have our identity, that it's an absolute. That's it. We found the thing. We found the thing we're seeking. And what we don't allow ourselves is the grace for our identity to evolve and change and even completely go somewhere different. And yeah, and I think that's the cycle of life. You and I, we're the same age, and I hit the same thing. I decided a few years ago I was going to be a long distance runner, ultra runner. And what do you think happened? Well, I got hurt, and that's because, a 50-year-old person who hasn't been very much a runner most of his life tries to do that. But what I did discover in that, and I felt a lot of shame and embarrassment because I'm the guy. I went to Instagram. I was like, guess what I'm doing? I'm doing this amazing thing. And it was that recognition identity crisis that I went into. And then I was like, shit, now I got to tell them I'm not doing the thing because I can't. And who am I because of that? But then I think ultimately through a process, what I found were things that I do love that are sustainable. Like I found yoga and I was like, I would have never done that. And I love it. And it's actually better for me than the other thing I was trying. And, so I think there is this part of identity of who are you being in this phase of your life? Are you allowing that grace to, like you said, just let it be and let it happen? And I think you and I we could rap about this and jam on it for a long time, but I really want to talk about a lot of things with you because anytime I get a chance to bend your ear, I value that time. But we are or I try to be. I think you do a beautiful job of being transparent about self-coaching sometimes, coaching yourself through challenges and things like that, but you also work with a lot of high achieving women, like some brilliant women in all aspects of life and business. And I think we are in a world now where a lot of people, because of whatever reason, could be politics, religion, energy, depends on what you believe and where you're going. But a lot of people can feel stuck and burned out or trapped in some way. So when you're doing your work, like what do you see as a common reason or a common denominator between people feeling the way they feel? And it could be you as well.
Number one, holding themselves to capitalistic ideals. We are inundated, and I don't even want to call it, like in the spiritual world, we call it mass consciousness. I don't even want to call that. I very specifically want to call out American culture. And listen, I love making money, but I had to come to the distinction of commerce. And for me, the difference between commerce and capitalism involves the government and exploitation of people and resources. And so how do I participate in the buying and selling of goods and services without exploitation of my audience, of my client, of myself? Because that's where I did over pleasing, over functioning, and then doing my best. This one's the hardest for me because I am, I always sound so good and benevolent, but I got an Amazon problem, right? Like where I live, Amazon, I just put in an order today for some of the things that we need. And so I'm not going to deny that I'm still participating in exploitative practices, and I'm doing my best to, I don't know that any of us can unless we're going off grid. And so, and it's important to me to recognize I can participate in buying and selling and in marketing without exploitation of myself and my audience. Same thing with, when I'm paying, I don't have any help right now, but I've always paid my assistants a fair fee and those kinds of things. Those are important in my values. But what I see when I started tracking, so one of the things that happens is when I'm working with people and in the world, I don't just see the top line, I see 27 layers deep and wide. I've learned that that's called bottom-up thinking. It's one of the reasons it's like, very common for ADD, autistic, neurodivergent people. I don't think linear. Now, linear is a part of the thing, but I see all these other connections as well. And as I was listening to clients for the last 5 years, I just kept hearing these standards that were not from the person's heart or core. They were from an external pressure. And then I started just critical thinking, just exploring my own beliefs and exploring. So one of the things was with Amazon, when I need that on Amazon. So noticing that I have an impulse. And then 2, what am I craving? So instead of changing the behavior, I consider myself a behavior expert, actually, right? As a coach, we're coaching behavior. And this was me 20 years ago as a productivity coach. Intrinsic motivation is what makes sustainable change. And we use so much shame-based external motivation, and then it leads to a big dip afterwards. So things like when I go for Amazon to notice a little deeper, what am I craving? And so what my clients were craving and what they were pushing themselves to do were not congruent. And it would have to come up in the conversation, but it's like, they don't want you to have self-trust, because if you don't have self-trust and that self-compassion and that self-connection, like literal attunement connection, that's what I mean, like the nervous system, if we don't have that, if we're taught to trust even God outside of us, don't feel this way, trust God, get the opinion of everybody else on what your book cover should be. No offense, Hank Avink, right? But like, this is what we do. Yeah. I get that that's also a marketing thing, but right, like asking other people's opinions and instead of slowing down and trusting ourselves. If we don't trust ourselves, then we buy shit we don't need and they can control us. And there's a very specific scientific term called interoception. And interoception is the physio-psychological thing in a child. When we teach a child learns through interoception when they have to go to the bathroom, when they're hungry, when they're thirsty, right? When they're babies, they just pee in their diaper. And as they get older, combined with potty training from parents, we start to learn to recognize those internal senses and then the appropriate place to go to the restroom, let's say. And simultaneously, most of the people I have ever worked with in 22 years, so interoception is not just physical, it's also knowing, trusting your gut, trusting yourself. If you're upset about something as a little child and the parent said, I'll give you something to cry about, or go to your room, let me create separation when you're upset, so we break the attunement. So these, and then in my world, a big one I'm realizing, like the most traumatic thing that was ever done to me was the culture of evangelicalism, honestly. And it did everything to get me to not source outside myself. And so that psychological skill wasn't developed. And we're all out here with our legs dangling. And those are skills that can be learned, but they really do need to be learned. And so we don't know how to emotionally process. We don't know how to hold difficult emotions. We don't know how to struggle and be safe. Like we take it to the polarizing, like if we're struggling, that's an absolute failure or there's shame involved.
Right.
And I know that's a lot, but those are a lot of the things I've been thinking about as I realign, is how can I do this without impossible, externally exposed, listen, I will see something on TikTok and then I buy it. I'm easily influenced.
I mean, you're human after all,
Right. Well, yeah. And it's not either or. It's like, oh, what am I craving? No, you're actually craving this because you need this. And sometimes I put something in my Amazon cart that it's like, oh, you just want a little dopamine hit. Maybe take a quick walk and wait 24 hours. And if you still want it, then get it.
Yeah.
Same thing with drinking. I don't drink that much anymore, but for a while there, I was just like, what am I craving? Just checking in. Is this automatic? And is there something? And sometimes, I'm craving a glass of wine. And other times I'm like creating avoidance.
Yeah, or escapism or whatever. I heard someone this week say they were, talking about behavior. And I think that's, and they said what we're seeking when we binge eat, or if we have a snacking problem, the same thing that we're seeking with alcohol, the same thing we're seeking with binge eating, the same thing we're thinking with shopping. We're seeking the same thing, and it's a change of the breath, it's a change of the pattern of breathing, or it is the dopamine and all that stuff, and we feel really good sometimes, but it is that all of those behaviors produce the same thing, and it's in some way. And it was a very fascinating argument that they were presenting. And I was like, I never really thought of it that way. But then I started thinking of my own life and I was like, well, it's true. Like when I go shopping, I feel abundant. I feel, look at me out here doing these fancy things. And then same when I have a glass of wine, I feel, I'm relaxing now. This is a relaxing time. Same when I'm eating good food. And so it's really fascinating. It's funny you brought up that, because I had an interaction with my son this week. We have a little table that kind of snugs right into our couch, and we have a beige couch. It's very neutral room. That's why we like it. And I actually had a glass of wine and I put it on that little table, and he was being a 10-year-old boy. And I said, Bax, watch your feet because my wine is right here. It wasn't 2 seconds later, he kicks the wine over on the couch. And I reacted. I didn't yell at him, but I did let him know that that's why I told you not to do that. And then we got it all clean. But he created separation by going to his room, and I didn't send him to his room. And I recognize that. I'm very proud of this, by the way. It's the only reason I'm talking about it.
Yeah, it's a
I
big
went,
deal. It's a big deal.
it is, but I went to his room and I sat with him and I said, "Hey, we made a mistake. Dad makes mistakes, you know." And then I started, after the fact, I started thinking like, I wouldn't have gotten that. I got the rub some dirt on it, you know, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. I didn't get how to process these emotions of I made a mistake. What do I do next? It was either don't make a mistake or you're a failure. You're completely unacceptable. I think I grew up in the church. I think the church presents that. If you do this list of things, you're completely not getting into the club, right?
And yeah, core trauma beliefs. Mine was, I had two, like one was the apocalypse and being left behind, but the other one is being in third grade, showed some video of Lot's wife who, you know, Sodom and Gomorrah is burning down. And there's this visual representation of they're not supposed to look back. And Lot's wife looks back and she turned into a pillar of salt. And then the pillar of salt disappeared. And that is my core wound.
Wow.
Like that is the deepest, like it took me a while to get that. But you know, when I would be like, and what else? And what are you afraid would happen? And what are you afraid would happen? Through lots of therapy. Let me let my dog out so he doesn't make noise.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, good boy. Same thing, right? And my mom asked, well, why didn't you tell me this was happening at school? I was a child. You were a child. We believe these things. And I don't know about you, but I loved school. I loved my teachers. And I don't think my teachers had any concept that what they were teaching, they didn't know that that was damaging to me, but I did internalize that. That if I didn't behave a certain way, then this unconscious sense of disconnection. And there was a video I saw when I did a training with Gabor Mate. It's called the Still Face Experiment. There's a handful of them on YouTube. This one is about 2 minutes and 44 seconds. And it shows this 9-month-old baby. So she can't talk yet. Her mother's there. This ends safely. And I show it to all my new clients. I show it to all my existing clients quite often. I talk about it a lot. And so the mother's, they're goo goo gaga with the baby and they're playing and just interact. They're attuned, right? They're connected. And then the mother turns her head as a part of the experience. And when she comes back, so she is physically there, but she turns it off. No bad face, just a neutral face. And immediately the first thing the baby does is try to re-engage with pleasing, like, you know, and it's a pleasing affect. And when that doesn't work, the baby then starts getting frustrated and fight or flight. So the first one is fawning, pleasing. The second one is frustration, flight. And then the third one, as time goes on, the baby starts to fold into itself. And as soon as that happens, the mother reconnects her energy with the baby. So they don't let it go fully into this folding state. And I was like, oh my God, that's the Crow kids. People pleasing, fawning. Kids number 2 and 3, that disconnection there was long enough that those are the 2 fighters. And the 4th child completely turned in, right? Those are nervous system states.
Wow.
Trying to regain attachment.
Yeah. Wow.
That end up being adult coping behaviors. And for those of us that are fortunate enough to not choose these super destructive behaviors, we're choosing coping mechanisms that are rewarded by society, but that aren't always healthy.
Yeah. That's amazing. I can see that. You know, and I was thinking about this. I was thinking about my mom, you know, she passed in 21. But I was like, she did the best she could, but there was a lot of things in there that she didn't even know she was doing that I'm dealing with now.
Yeah.
You know, and
absolutely.
and it is that kind of stuff of, you know, where do you find your value? You know, and I know you talk a lot in your work about soul alignment, emotional alignment. and really aligning, where do we go from here? Like once we realize these behaviors and we realize that's it, and you and I are pretty anti-hustle culture, pretty anti-bro marketing, pretty anti, the
Completely. Yeah.
I think those are manipulative and exploitation of um, mainly the coaching industry or any sales in general. But where do you find that like if I wanted to get soul aligned with my cause or my purpose or even my being, what would I do? How would I go about that?
I have to say that I've probably shifted what helps me get soul aligned is what I call self leadership. And self leadership was this paradigm that I discovered, um, internal family systems parts work. So 4 years ago, I had seen the phrase from a colleague of mine, overfunction and underfunction. And I was overfunctioning and starting to feel that burnout and resentment. And I started working with her and I got introduced to internal family systems, and I immediately jumped into training and both on my own and official training with the IFS Institute. So parts work. And this modality is that we all have a core self, and then our mind is made up of parts. And I remember, 20 years ago being a productivity coach and talking with people, a part of me believes this or wants to do this, but a part of me does that, right? So it's a very common language. So instead of aligning and pushing anything out, we realize that all parts have benevolent intent. So even when I'm anxious, my anxiety, so I'm personifying it, helps in the brain. Like, oh, hello, anxiety, I see you. Instead of trying, this is the thing, instead of trying to have vitality that I don't have, hello, limited capacity. I see you, I'm here for you. And I remember seeing a Thich Nhat Hanh say something many years before I started parts work. And it's a book about anger. And still currently, I'm actually in a phase where I'm working specifically with shame and anger. And he was like, there, anger, I see you, I won't leave you. And my body just melted into that. And now, all these years later, training in this modality, what we're doing is what that mom was doing, the baby, we're attuning with, I don't call them negative emotions, but psychology does and society does. And that's the whole point. They've been seen as negative instead of, can you imagine teaching your son, do you notice what you're feeling? And he's like, yeah, I'm ashamed. I feel like I messed up. And you're like, okay, there, shame. Let's connect with our shame. We see you. What are you afraid? What are you afraid? We ask them, what are your fears and concerns? Oh, I'm afraid, if we give it a voice, shame may say something like, I'm afraid that I spilled dad's red wine and he's going to be mad at me. Oh, thank you for letting me know. And so there is a lot less fixing, actually. And there's a whole process that we can call unburdening, but I have noticed so many of us just need to meet with our struggle. I call it struggling better. It's like, oh, their struggle, I see you. And those are the words to represent kind of a somatic and breath and just a presence. And then we learn that these emotions actually have information for us, and we don't have to get rid of them. So doubt, for example, I remember a couple of years ago in my old membership, on Thursdays, we would have a call for people who'd been in business for over 15 years. There were like 12 women on the call. And I said, let me ask y'all a question. How many of you this week, and these are people all established careers, multi-six figures, successful, how many of y'all experience so severe doubt this week that you thought you would quit? Every single one of them. And nobody's talking about it. When I talked about rejection sensitive dysphoria, which was part of what led me to my ADD diagnosis, the people that came out of the woodworks and in my inbox privately and told me that this is living behind them. And what we've all been taught to do is get rid of it, exterminate it. All that does is push it deeper down into our bodies, into our nervous system. And so parts work plus, and IFS is very somatic. It's very body aware. And so it's given me an experiential modality to create attuned, instead of alignment, self-leadership. So how do I lead? I'm not, instead of making doubt go away, oh, doubt is my business partner. And if I wake up on Monday morning and have a little bit of scarcity, so I woke up with a little bit of scarcity this morning, and I'm like, oh, scarcity, let's sit down and connect. Let me connect with you. And then here's the other piece. I don't self-coach anymore. I don't coach, teach, or parent my parts. I get curious with them, and I attuned listening.
Right.
And so then I listen to their fears and concerns. I listen to what they need me to know. And then there are times when I may update them because they think I'm 14 years old or 7 years old or whatever. And I'm like, actually, it's 2025. I'm an adult. We don't believe that anymore. And so I'm building a relationship with all these parts of me. And we often use the analogy of a bus. It's like, who's driving the bus? Right. And all the parts are still welcome on the bus, but we want Allison's, and I represent it in my own self with that yellow heart, right? I want my yellow heart to be leading the show. And by the way, that's not 100%. It's like, if I can get 7% of my yellow heart leading, that's enough. Right. Because all my overachievers are like, I can't be on 100% self. And it's like, that's not the goal.
Right.
The goal is, right, like, I'm just holding all these parts' hands as I maneuver through the world. And it is so much softer and gentler. And what happens is, I know I have a lot of words, but what happens is, when that happens and we start to relax, the natural creativity and confidence and courage emerges. So that flow, some people call it flow state. You can't think your way into flow state. You have to soften your way into flow state.
Ooh, oh, that hits. That hits.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So in compassionate inquiry too, I did a bunch of training in that. And then sure enough, Gabor Mate and Richard Swartz are doing a bunch of stuff with Sounds True for the lay person out there. But those two go together so well. And it's a little bit slower process than we're used to in the real estate world, but it's not shame-based.
Mhm.
And it takes a while to unwind, but it gives me so much more hope without having to be delusional.
That's so important. That's
Mhm.
that's what we need. One of the things, I follow you pretty closely on all platforms and and everything, and I'm fortunate enough to have your cell number in my phone in case there's a moment that is need. But one of the things that really stuck out that I think you just beautifully explained was this idea of going from performing to being.
Mhm.
And I think that was, I had jotted those two words down as I was looking at, some of the things that you talk about. And I think that's it. The old you might have been like, well, let's create a performance that makes it seem like we're not experiencing this shame or this guilt or this failure or whatever we're experiencing. And that's how I was raised. I can't speak for you, but I was raised to, sit down and be quiet like that little boy over there. He's being good. You be good too. And inside I was angry because we weren't getting whatever tacos or whatever I wanted in the moment, And so that, for me, that was just really a powerful moment to say, wow, okay, when you shift your thoughts and your efforts from performing to being, I think that's kind of what you're talking about. Like, embrace the scarcity and be with the scarcity. Don't perform over it so that you pretend it's not there. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, that scarcity actually is trying to protect us. That's one of the other things, is like, we realize, oh, if you're showing up, you're worried about something. And if another human being tells me not to worry, they're going to get punched, because I am in my nice girl phase is gone. Like, I literally went to Academy last week and punched that Bob, that it's like a man. I want to buy one. I am in, not spending $370 on a punching bag, but I'm this close to it because it's such a great way to get anger out.
Yeah.
Performance, I think there's a piece to it too. So my former clients that are like Enneagram 3, they all know they're performing, and they're very conscious of the fact that they're performing. I was not conscious of the fact that I was performing. I did not realize that I was masking, that I was behaving in a socialized conditioning way. And I'm still unpacking all those, it's not like I said, I'm going to go out of the house and I'm going to be this way. That is not in my nature at all. Yeah. And right, that little one inside that is so desperate to be loved and adored and seen and not invisible and matter. Oh, I need to be an easygoing woman. That's what's attractive to a man. I need to be happy and positive and fun. And frankly, I'm just a little bit of a Grinch who likes to lay around in bed. It's little things like having, I cut off all my hair, and part of, I see these pictures of me with this long, gorgeous hair. And part of it is like, I just am fucking with these societal expectations, not for them, but for me, to look at myself in the mirror with this really short, shaved on the side hair is an interesting exercise. And I know you've played with your hair a lot too, but it's an interesting exercise in that identity and what is really mine and what did I make up unconsciously that I have to be or do. I have a lot of, I noticed some tears coming up. And I think that's valid. I won't live in it all day, but it's valid grief that so many of us, same thing with like the church, taught me to be a certain kind of woman, or I wouldn't be chosen as a wife. And and then you get into the business world, start making money, and it's like, oh, I got to be this kind of business person or it won't make it work. And even 10 years ago, was I being authentic? Yes. And I didn't realize that there were even more layers of, if we were to call it, for me, a more self-led creative journey in my both life, relationship, and business. It's not either or. So for example, I think you'll appreciate this. I've been experimenting with YouTube. It is a hard journey.
Yeah.
It's hard. And I don't think in formulas. Like I get resistance to, oh, if you just do, I don't work that way. And it's not either or. So it's like, what if I could learn hooks and I could find a way to make my hooks resonate with me instead of saying, well, I don't ever do hooks. Right. So it's nuanced. And I think that's another thing so many of our people are missing because of that unconscious mental training. And I'm not saying that everything is that we're trained is wrong. And when we self-examine with compassion instead of shame, is that really true for me? Does that give me energy? Does it take away my energy? Does it, what are those 3 or 4 layer deeps motives?
Yeah. That's powerful. And I think, we were talking earlier that I got a comment on YouTube, oddly enough, about crime this week, but it was what you would expect, It was, bro, you look like you just cried.
Okay.
But that was the comment. My comment was, and, I had some more words to say, but I don't combat the idea. I just, I have to stand and not be ashamed of that. Or what if I did, so what? Yeah, I can't remember if I did, but it's a high chance I could have, because I don't shy away from those kind of things, those kind of emotions. But I think even that is something that we're not trained to deal with. Like, how do you deal with yourself when you're sad?
Mm-hmm.
How do you sit in a room with yourself when you're sad? And I've read this study that Harvard, I think it was Harvard, did, and they said they gave, I think it was a crazy amount of people, like 1,000 people, like a lot of people. And they said, you've got the choice. You can sit in this room by yourself for an hour, or you can receive an electric shock and it'll go down to 5 minutes. And they said like over 80% of the people took the electric shock than sitting in the room with themselves for an hour, because that is something that maybe they fear, or maybe they're uncomfortable with, or we're just not trained or taught or parented or preached or anything like that. We're not equipped to be in this expansion of our mind for that long without any external stimulation. You know,
Yes.
I
And
thought it was so interesting.
from my experience and learning so far, when I track it back, it's like, no, literally, this is something we could have learned how to do and that society could have supported.
Mhm.
And now at 53 years old, I'm having to teach myself. And then it feels weird because I'm an adult teaching, learning these skills. But you're exactly right. We're actually trained to do everything but trust ourselves. And sitting in a room by ourselves for an hour with no stimulation is a giant exercise in being with ourselves and all of our parts. And I'm working on training my language because I keep saying without shame, but shame is like, I'm a part too. And
Right.
there's a colleague that's written a book called De-Shaming. And for me, the goal is not to de-shame, it's to learn how to be with shame so that shame doesn't lead or shame doesn't jump up so hard. And so it's like, oh, let me build, some people call it befriend all parts. And I'm slowly building my relationship with shame and fear. My anxiety parts are all sitting out by the pool. They are retired. They're like, yeah, we don't have to run the show anymore. But so I'm at these deeper layers. But right, it is, and I can, you were talking about your school too, and our parents and what they did and didn't do. And for me, it doesn't come with the energy of blame. It's reason, not fault. There's a chapter in my book called Reason, Not Fault, because I like to see the reasons. My little thinking parts like to know how the radio works. And so they see the reason. And if we see the reason, then we have the ability to learn a new skill, to learn self-attunement, to learn how to attune with shame so that shame doesn't need to take over the show. And these are all things that we could have learned. And fortunately, because nobody I know did. I know one person in my life that claims they learned all this, but they're so disassociated. They are so listen, I'm the queen of disassociation and I can spot it a mile away. And I'm like, yeah, nice try. But their work is not my business. So
right. I love that. I think most people are looking for a blame, like who did this to me? Whose fault is this? And instead of the reason, like if you find something about yourself you may not be comfortable with or like, or that's taking a front, trying to drive the bus, as you say, fine. But the reason would be much more productive than the blame, and who's at fault.
Well, and here's what's funny. If I didn't have all that neglect, I had a lot of good things with mom and dad too. But if I didn't have all that Gen X neglect, I wouldn't have the problem solving genius that I have now. So the same things that natured my insecurities are also the same things that made me like my strategic process thinking. I'm literally, if you bring me a radio, I'm not an expert on radios, but you could bring me a machine I've never seen before and I will figure it out. And that's how I am about life too. That came from neglect and necessity.
Yeah.
And part the way I think. So the gifts also, I can't lay blame without saying, oh, by the way, that also brought a lot of my independence. It's nuanced. It's not either for or. And one of the things I'm trying to do now is I look at my parents who have a hard time asking for help. It's like, oh, how can I ask for help now so that when I'm 83, it's not so hard? How can I be more comfortable receiving and asking for help instead of so dang over functioning independent? And I like labels, by the way. For me, labels create organization. That's the tism.
I love that, and I think so, but even that is something people shy away from. It comes back to that individual journey. For some people, labels don't work, or they think a certain kind of way about it, and for you, it's like, no, that's actually how I keep things in a orderly fashion, so that I can do the deep work, so that I can approach my days without feeling insane or feeling wrong or feeling overstimulated in some way. And so I think it all comes back to that. You were talking about YouTube, and I was like, the biggest breakthrough I've had in the last 5 years, maybe more, is to just do things the way that I do them.
Mhm.
And the book, story, offer line, which is great. It works in marketing. You and I have done it. We've studied it. It's been preached to us and ingrained in us. But I think the biggest breakthrough was when I was like, I want to have a semblance of that because I want people to be interested so that maybe they learn something. But I can't create a foundation on something that's a performance instead of me being.
Right,
It's
exactly.
me performing.
Yeah.
And so it was, as I was just kind of reintroduced, because I've been on a social media hiatus for the last couple of months. As I was reintroducing to what you're talking about now, that just, it hit such a home base with me of, wow, okay, I didn't acknowledge it as that when I was doing it. I was just like, man, I can't do someone else's version of YouTube or Instagram or
Right.
marketing.
Right.
And that was just a huge breakthrough. But that does bring us, we're both in coaching, and I think coaching it right now, it's built on kind of tough love. It's built on the bro marketers, what you're doing is wrong, and my proven method is the only way out of what you're doing is wrong. And so I was really curious about, you and I are both sensitive people, and we try to navigate the world as sensitive people, with that being a superpower, not a hindrance. But is there a balance between, in coaching especially, is there a balance between compassion and accountability?
So first of all, I have very strong beliefs about accountability. I'm not accountable to anybody ever. There's nothing that could make me be accountable to anybody. If my clients ask for accountability, I am not the coach. That's an external force. I'm only accountable to my head on the pillow at night.
Love that.
And my own family's wants and needs, and my own wants and needs. So that external force is more of a model that doesn't foster self-trust. It's the opposite of self-trust to me. Now, do we want to check in on some things? But here's the thing, it's not my job as a coach to remember what you need to check in about. So I got obviously a little bit of impassioned. I can't stand that because it doesn't work. It works for a short time, but it's shame-based. It's fear-based. It's not leading. So what I love about, let me pull this off my wall, and I'll send you a document of this. Don't mind my boobs on your video. Not that they're attractive at 53. One of my, I will tell your audience, honest to God truth. I can't remember the name of the site, but every once in a while we're always like, if things go really sad, we'll just flash a titty. And there are rich people that will pay for all sorts of stuff. You don't even have to be sexual, but my little niche is like, yeah, 53-year-old woman's lame boobs. And maybe I can get paid for those. Just every day, here's my boring boobs, boringboobs.com.
Here's my boobs.
And people pay for like low effort, no personality involved.
Right.
Okay. I'm serious.
I love it. I love it.
It's plain B. So in IFS, and there's no particular order, but this was the order that I started writing them down because my system knew what order would help. So calm, connected, compassionate, and curious. When I am these four things with myself, and to be connected, I need to take a few breaths and get calm. Then I make that attuned connection, and then I can get compassionate. Like, I see you, I'm here for you. And then tell me, what is it you need me to know? I'm here, I'm listening. And when I do that, all these stressed out parts relax. And the natural thing that rises up is confidence, creativity, clarity, and courage. So it's not a puny model.
No.
Compassion leads me to punching assholes in the face if I need to. It also leads me to bold writing that's true. Right? Like, this is for me, this is like the business plan. Actually, I have a podcast somewhere that I did a few years ago. I was like, oh, this is my business plan. And if I will do these four, but if we're just doing accountability only without, right, and these first four are nervous system regulation and care, and emotional care, that lead to these physical, creative, emotional states. But we're trying to force through accountability, confidence, creativity, clarity, and courageous. You're not going to get anything sustainable. you're going to get a mask, you're going to get a performance. That is, and I will die on that hill.
I agree with you.
A lot of
Wow,
things I'm
that's-
like, I won't stand in authority, but I have seen it. I have watched it. It's not easy work. And I just don't want us to be in a world where we have to have our ass kicked, because I'll tell you what, when I wake up, and there are certain times. Last week, my writing coach was so cute. She was like, every day, she says, what are you working on? And she means writing. And I was like, my attitude, because my self accountable, like a party was like, no shame, a little bit more coachy, like was like, okay, we need a little bit more masculine energy. You gotta make some choices, right? So but that was still very self-led. Self-led doesn't always mean Buddha on the couch. Sometimes I have to get courageous with myself. So those are my beliefs, and I sadly can see how society has trained us to want Amazon Prime results. And so that's why, let me kick you in the ass. Let's hustle. It hits that Amazon Prime. And then you're left with the hangover. And those hangovers build up in our systems over time. Ask me how I know.
Yeah, they do.
Heart attacks aren't fun.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You've been down that road. They're not. I thought I was having one. I drove my son and my dog and myself to the ER in my truck.
Good for you.
And yeah, it was scary. But the flood of emotions and the flood of thoughts, and then there's this lingering effect of, then every time you get a stitch in your chest or your back hurts, you start going down. You go right back to that. Should I be doing more? But I love that, because I do think, I talk to a lot of people, and you do too, I know, and I know some of the things that you hear. We hear similar things of the coaching didn't work, or that program didn't work, or it didn't work. And I think a lot of it leads back to that forcing accountability, thinking that's what people need. And you just laid it out so beautifully about, if you get the calm and the connection down, that is the path to those things you actually desire. And it's also the path that marketers can't market very easily, and you can't coach it very easily. You can't mentor it very easily. And only the truly courageous will dare go there with someone they just met. Right. And so I think, when I started thinking about this, and of course I started thinking about you immediately, I was like, where's coaching going? Where is this industry going? Who are the pillars? What is it? It can't just be a marketing ploy. We've had so many coaches come into business that are just great at marketing, and they get a few testimonials and off to the races they go. And nothing, I don't want to say anything bad about them, but I think coaching for people like you and I has such a deep connection, and it's a deep process. It's deep work. It's not something you're going to come in one time and there you go, you're all set. Go get them, Tiger.
Like one of my current clients is on year 3 with me, and she, just a couple of weeks ago, she's really deconstructed a lot and made some powerful, difficult decisions. And she was a super people pleaser, Southern. And she was like, this is the hardest work I've ever done, but I will shout it from the mountaintops. And I appreciate that she acknowledged me, but she's participating in the process. And I think that's the other piece is, listen, my brain loves to learn new things. And how many of us have taken a class and not implemented or not finished the class? And so those of us, especially that are smart, and where I call it head led, like my brain thinks I'm doing something if I'm learning new, but if I'm not embodying it. And so I can analyze why these things happen and the psychology of it. But if I'm not participating in the attuned reworking and nurturing of my psychology, I'm not making any change. And it took time to get wonky, and it's going to take time. I don't even like to use the word heal, because that assumes that there's an end process. And coaching wise, right now, I don't know. I don't like that word. It's my job, but I'm looking for another word. And I'm holding the word in the essence of the energy of my coaching practice instead of my coaching business. Yes, it's a business, but I'm divesting from that machine that I built and figuring out, how do I create a sustainable profitable practice. And there's some challenges with that. And I love working with people. I don't want to scale and not work with people. I don't want to, I don't like it, but let the gurus teach the 5th grade personal development. I'm here for some nuanced, deep work that not everybody wants to do, and that's okay. And I think you're doing that kind of stuff too. These are people who it's just what they do. It's not like, oh, I'm going to go take this one coaching session so I learn how to XYZ. It's like, oh, this is a part of my development until the day I die. A part of my nurturing practices.
Yeah.
Not a one-time solution.
And that's empowering for you. I think that is something that means something. That's legacy building. And I think if I ask you to give me a number of how many people you think you've positively affected over your career, it would be, 1, hard to do, and 2, I think if you gave me a number, it would be incredibly low based on what actually is.
I agree. I can die today knowing that I've made a tremendous difference. Honestly, I think every day about leaving the industry. I'm not sure what I would do, because I do need to make a certain amount of money, and I also need to pay for my health, and my health is my biggest expense right now. And I'm only getting older, and so that's really important to me. And it's not that I don't love it, but it's intrinsically, every day it's a rumble to get up. And some days I'm too tired to do the rumble. And I don't know what else I would do. This is also work I love. And I don't know. I notice how I'm trying to force myself to an answer, and there is no answer.
There's no answer.
But I do feel a sense. I was never driven by legacy, but I know that if I were to die today, that the legacy I've left, multi-generational, is powerful. And what I love is, like, I both appreciate that, but part of it is my enoughness, right? Like, Allison, whether you grow another day, if you never grow anymore, you are more than enough and you are loved. Now, what do you want to create? If you never help another person, what do you want to create? It'd probably be helping people or animals, but it's detaching. I'm not dumping, but detaching from that recognition, response, euphoria. And yet today I almost thought about going on Facebook and saying, could y'all tell me if I've impacted you, or if you love me, tell me, because I can use a bucket fill every once in a while.
Right. Yeah. I think we all could, but I think that's kind of what we look for. And I think that's what people who aren't true coaches, in my opinion, this is just my opinion. And when I say true coaches, I mean people who understand that deep work. They understand, and they're equipped with the tools to go there with people and to help people, and maybe shed some light on these dark little crevices that are in our psychic, our psychology, or our subconscious mind. And then I think there are people who are just here to help you make a lot of money in a short amount of time. And then you realize, well, that didn't do anything. That didn't solve all my problems. It made maybe some worries less than others, but then it brings on a whole new thing. But I think it's fascinating. And, I do want to respect your time, but I think as I approach this, and I have to say this because I think this is the 3rd time you've been the first guest on one of these crazy podcasts that I've created. But I do believe that, when you look back at everything that we've done, this was probably our most powerful conversation. And the reason for that is because by being a friend to you and watching you and subscribing to the things that you kind of coach, I found my alignment. And I think, this podcast, Hustle to Harmony, is the journey I've been on. And it is, and so when I started thinking about doing this, I think I texted you and I was like, I can't think of anyone who needs to be on this first one except you, because you just have allowed me to explore, and you've allowed me to fail, and you've allowed me to grow and build on these things. And so that, for me, it was just an honor to have that opportunity to do that. So if you need a bucket fill, I'm happy to help you out, because
that means a lot at this phase of like I've been really working on my internal grounded confidence and power, and then you combine that with being a midlife woman, it at times feels more invisible, and so to be seen for that, and then to be seen for, like, I really just took in your word harmony, and harmony to me is musical, and which means it's nuanced.
Yeah.
And that's why these little taglines is stop trying not to be human. And I love our spiritual lives, but we're born into these human bodies, and I use spirituality as escapism. And so how can I thread those two together? And that's harmony.
Mhm.
So thank you. I appreciate that. And I appreciate being first.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. I had the realization, you appreciate this story because we both like similar things, that through my own spiritual journey late last year, I realized, and everything is music or food with me. It's just what I do. And I had this realization through some meditative work that I was doing in Reiki and things like that. And the flood of the idea that I'm a bass player, not a lead singer, just came flooding in. And it was that harmony. It's like, well, name a great piece of music without a bass. There's probably out there, but there's not a lot. And my whole life I was trying to be a lead singer, and that's not my role here. My role here is to be a really supportive inline bass player. And once I realized that, I was like, okay, so now what happens? And that's when the floodgates opened up, and universe was like, oh, here it is. Here's your hustle to harmony. Here's this thing. Here's comfort. Here's understanding. It did not make things easier. It just made things more aligned, as you say.
Well, and it's not necessarily easier out in the world, but it's easier inside, because then all of a sudden we're if we do have any drive, the drive is that creative drive that is aligned. It's now self-led. It's not led by parts trying to protect us and prevent harm or fit in. It's led by pure creative flow, and instead of the thing we think we should be. So yeah, I appreciate being on this journey with you. I could talk forever. I do have a call with a girlfriend to help her figure out some membership stuff, but I'm always willing to have these conversations, and I appreciate you. And I'm excited to watch Hustle to Harmony be a baseline for people.
That's my goal. And I want to thank you for being here. And I'll just do the show thing where first I want to ask you to follow Allison on YouTube. That's where she's doing the work, and
I'm totally trying to get monetized.
Yeah, and
I'm
that's
like,
where you're
16 years old, but I really am like, I want to get paid for creating content.
Yes, well, I think you should. I think it's that good. But I'll put all those links in the show notes. Allison, it's always a joy. I'll let you get on with your day. Thank you so much for your time and extra time and figuring out the tech and the life and everything with me. I really appreciate it. And thank you for being the first person on Hustle to Harmony. I think you set an incredibly high bar for the people to come after you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Big hugs.
Big hugs to you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.